with your friends. One of my mentors, I watch so many people. They're always like, "Yeah, don't forget to click that hand and put $1 in. You don't have to put no money into this. This is free education, as all education should be." Okay, so looks like we are live on YouTube now. So I need to grab my microphone. So yeah, I want to start with Africa, because what better place to start with? And I think that it's best to start with um, Eber's papyrus. Eber's papyrus is probably the the furthest back we can go regarding perspectives on depression. Arguably, individuals might say that the furthest back you can go might be Samaria, Mesopotamia. Um, it doesn't matter. They were practically all doing the same thing. It was all spiritual. It was all spiritual. There was no such thing as the word depression. So, for example, if you look up the etymology, let's just go there right quick. You look up the etymology on depression, you're going to see that it more than likely the word itself came in probably the 1500s. So etymology, when it comes to depression, a label and a word created by Europeans as a term in astronomy, ironically also, angular distance of a star between the horizon, that's in the 1400s. Um, Melancholy. Now, interesting enough, I would say that that's probably the earliest word used as it pertains to depression was melancholy, and that was used by the Greeks. It might have been Pythagoras. Don't quote me on that. I will dig deeper into that. There'll be a lot of um, lessons on depression, so we'll go deeper and dissect that in detail. But Pythagoras or uh, Hippocrates were the ones that coined the word melancholy, and even then, their perspective on it was through the route of bile, bile being a fluid in your microbiome and gut system, which is interesting because just really recently, I would say probably over the past, I don't know, few years, they've really been talking about the connection of the gut microbiome and its effects regarding cytokines. You look at cytokines, cytokines are basically cell receptors and they send messages up and down the vagus nerve system to the mind. They send messages, and that's how you get this cause and effect on serotonin and dopamine. I digress. But yeah, going back to depression, a melancholy leading to desperation and known to theologians under the name of acedia was not uncommon in monasteries, and most of the recorded instances of medieval suicides in Catholicism were by monks. Interesting. I actually did not know that. So that's something new I just learned also. 1400s though. What's it, 2020? That's like it's only 600 years ago when that word was created. And one of the reasons why I was so attracted and so addicted to investigating all this stuff was because you have these narratives on mental conditions through the route of colonialism, through the route of Europeanism, and I was like, well, what were people doing before 1700, before 1500, before 1300? Like, what were all these other different cultures doing? And they give us the words, we digest the words, we digest their narrative and their perspective on it. And now you have basically a culture of people looking at life, looking at reality through the lens of somebody else. That is extremely unhealthy. Not only that, again, going back to language and words, we're looking and perceiving things through another culture, another person's perspective, and we're using their terms. And don't get me started because the terms we're using are barbaric terms. It's barbaric language. English language is of its origins is of savage, beastly individuals who had to get taught basically all over again after ransacking Rome and burning Rome down. Northern Europeans had to learn science, had to learn medical practices, had to learn language through the Moors. What you know about the Moors? But Anyways, going back to the Ebers Papyrus. Um, so it's kind of messy here. Like I said, again, bear with me. This is just a first rough draft. I have so much information here. Um, I don't really want to teach like how most teachers teach. I want to teach how I learn. I just go through a lot of stuff. I have notes and books everywhere on everything. Um, this is one of my favorite books. You probably have seen me do postings on this. Um, on my IG. This is an awesome book. If you don't have it, get it if you can afford it. But you can get it used. It's in a few different places. But even here, it talks about the Ebers Papyrus. Let me see if I can find it right quick. But saying what I do know about the Ebers Papyrus off the top of my head, it really had depression, heavy feelings of sadness, psychological issues really had nothing to do with the brain. Now, could there have been chemical things going on in the brain, not the mind? I want you to understand that the mind is different from the actual physical computer system itself. Were there things going on in the brain regarding chemical stuff? Possibly so. They could care less. Their focus was on the hearts. That's what they talked about. Everything they talked about was basically through the heart. And one of the reasons why the heart was most important was because that's where really all actions were taken. That's where all decisions were made. So when you start thinking about um, the heart as opposed to the brain, even when individuals would die, they would just scoop the brain out, throw it away. They wanted to know what was going on with the heart. Stating the obvious, when you start looking at Mayat, what are they weighing? They're weighing the heart against the feather. You see how important the heart was? So when they were trying to figure out, again, what pain people were going through regarding sadness, regarding all these different issues, they were just going straight to the heart. I swear I'm gonna find this page. I'm gonna find this page somewhere. So, yeah, again, that's its earliest conception of depression was definitely through the heart, and it was spiritual also. It always had to do with the spiritual essence. Who was it that decided that um, they weren't going to rely on an essence of spirituality? The Greeks. It was the Greeks that were like, we don't believe in this spirit stuff. We're going to just focus straight on from their perspective, straight on the mind, straight on the gut microbiome. I will say I'll give them props a little bit. I'll give the Greeks props, and when I say that loosely is because um, no matter what they did, it was still taken from Kemet. It was still taken from Kush. It was taken from African ancestors, African ancestry. But one of their perspectives regarding how to relieve the symptoms of melancholy, as they called it, and that heavy feeling was exercise and diet. So now we're talking about, around 300 something BC when they're making decisions like that. And ironically, they would carry that notion, that narrative for a long time. It wasn't until early 1800s, late 1700s, when they started introducing these other things and mental insane asylums and trepanation and electroconvulsion. Barbaric. This is barbaric shit. But I wanted to go back to right here because this was interesting regarding mental symptoms. So I'm just going to read this to you right quick, and this is out of the Ebers Papyrus. It says mental symptoms and diseases. No known physician's title suggests specialization in mental diseases. Although psychic or mental symptoms are mentioned in many clinical observations, mainly in the Book of Heart, which is in the Ebers Papyrus, Book of Heart. In Ebels, and just, I'm sorry, I got a sidebar right quick. When I say Ebers Papyrus, please don't get it twisted. It is not George Ebers Papyrus. He obviously paid for it. It's in Berlin somewhere. It ain't that fool's papyrus. But that's where you'll find all this information. Eber's Papyrus, Book of Heart. In Ebel's translation of the papyrus, they occur in 14 prescriptions, but it must be added that whereas this author translate Ib by mind, Medunetra Ib is mind, and Hot Chech by heart, translate both by heart. In the following quotations, the word ib has been inserted whenever it occurs in the original, and the remainder of the word heart is the rendering of ha tej. In 7 observations, the cause of these symptoms is vascular. Ebers 855E. That's how you go. By the way, if you want to check out the Ebers Papyrus, if you can't buy it or can't find it, just type in Google Ebers Papyrus PDF, and that's a good way to download it. Download it, bookmark it, and again, go to the Book of Hearts, and you'll probably start around 855E. So it says 855E, as to faintness, the ib is faint. Remember, ib is mind. It is that the heart does not speak, or that the vessels of the heart are dumb or numb, there being no perception of them under the fingers. It arises through the air which fills them. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's still not um extremely clear to understand, but if you kind of break it up in pieces, and again, you you don't have to use science to understand a lot of these things. You don't need, you know, super quote unquote highly educated people to express and explain to you what these things were all about. Use your intuition, use your ancestors. So let's go back to that again. The mind is faint. It is the heart that does not speak. It is the heart that does not speak. Um, when you think of something simple, for example, like heartbreak, um, I can't tell you how many times a place that I like to go. I'm not gonna bring the mood down too low, but I gotta, I need an example to express this. But I go to the cemetery sometimes. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's meditative for various reasons. But one of the most sad and most disheartening thing is looking at a grave site, and you see a couple, and you see one person, and this individual passed away. I'm just going to use an example. This person passed away in 2000 April, and then it says the wife 2000 May 1st. Like it's immediate reaction is that this individual passed away because of heartbreak, because of heartache. That's a real thing. That's a real authentic thing. So when you start thinking about the heart not speaking, it's the mind and the heart not speaking. There's no avenues to release that pain. That pain is just, it's dormant, it's hidden. Um, Reality is slowly vanishing, it's going away. That's the heart. The heart is dumb, it's numb. Going back to the vessels in particular, being there being no perception of them under thy fingers, it arises through the air which fills them. Don't don't quite understand that part yet, but I will I will digress and get back to that. I'm gonna read the rest though. As to the feeling of sickness, the mind is sick, the heart is sick. It is debility of the heart through heat from the anus. I don't really know what that means either. As to the nejhe of the mind, the ib, this means that the mind, ib, het, in the heart, another reading being that the mind, ib, in the heart, which goes up and falls down. It's same thing. Again, use your intuition to balance out in your spirit what that means. The heart goes up and then it falls down. It's again, when I was using that perspective of it's just it's vanishing. It's one foot in the 3D material realm. It's 1 foot in the other realm. It's slowly going basically, and that is a perspective on depression. I have support groups Well, one in particular that centers around depersonalization, derealization. A lot of people don't know what that is. According to DSMs and according to European mental health and medical practices, depersonalization, derealization is considered a mental illness. Well, how do I know about that? It's because it's something that I dealt with intensely and severely back in 2013. So I had created this group in 2014 for natural therapies and natural remedies. I bring that up to say that that is a model that basically exists in that form, in that reality. Depersonalization is basically this dissociation, this detachment from your vessel. Derealization is a detachment from reality, and there's a lot of variables and root causes to these altered states and conditions. One in particular being stress, one in particular being depression. In depression, uh, a narrative is that the lower you go, the deeper you are in it. It's basically a sign and an experience. If you experience depression at its most intensity, that you are leaving this realm because you're basically not. Sounds like Kundalini. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely, yeah. In rock and roll. Thank you for commenting on that. It's just so similar to a lot of things. It's similar to different trips too, as far as ayahuasca or DMT is concerned. It's similar to a lot of things. Ironically, it's just interesting that you can go through this. Um, for me, and I'm speaking for myself when I say this, you can go through this journey of enlightenment and have nothing to do with any traditional plants. But to your point, meditation is one of many entrances into this mental illness called depersonalization, derealization. But yeah, so going back to the depression aspect of it all, your soul, your spirit is basically leaving because you're not using it. You're you're not functioning. You're not using what the creator gave you in this realm. And it's like being on bed rest. If you're on bed rest for a month and you don't use your legs, what's the first thing you got to do when you get out the bed? You got to go through this physical training. Well, it's the same thing with everything. Our bodies and vessels are so perfect that they're created to everything's created to be utilized. So if you don't want to use your legs are going to go. You don't want to use the brain's going to go. You don't want to use the heart's going to go. So you got to use these things. I want to continue on though. Ebers 855K, and just again, in case anybody new is joining in, this is the book I'm reading from, The House of Life per Ankh. Um, and that's the Ankhs, the per Ankh symbol, by the way, right there where that finger is. Per Ankh, if you don't know, that was university. They were all about university. They wasn't about nothing but learning, about oral traditions, oral lessons, etc., etc. Ebers 855K. Is that where I'm at? Yeah. As to the mind's kneeling, breakdown, this means that his mind is constricted and his heart in its place in the blood of the lung becomes small through it. Again, and his heart in its place in the blood of the lung becomes small through it. It is the heart, excuse me, it is that the heart is hot and the heart and mind becomes weary through it. He eats little and is fastidious. Again, the mind, the heart, constricted. What's the name of the book? Name of the book is The House of Life. Here you go again. The House of Life per Ankh. House of Life per Ankh. And it's written by, oh, excuse me, let me say the rest of it. Magic and Medical Science in Ancient Egypt. Kemet, of course. We'll make sure I say that. The author is, I can never say his name right. It's Gulini, something Gulini. It's Paul Gulini. I'm gonna spell it for you, okay? So if you wanna, you're more than welcome. I'm gonna spell this for you right quick. His last name is GHALIOUNGU. I'm almost ashamed of itself. Where you get that last name from? Again, last name spelling is GHALIOUNGUI. Just a side note, this book was actually recommended to me by Rashidi Runoko Rashidi, and I'm so happy that he um, led me down that path because it's like I said, it's a really really good book. I learned a lot out of this book about magic, about again about the mental, about diet practices. We'll get to that too as we do more lessons also. But going back to Eber's 855K, the mind is constricted. What does it mean to be constricted? It's imprisoned, it's tight, it's locked. And again, going back to the heart rising and falling down, like it's just you're basically losing. You're losing air. You're losing this battle, for whatever random reason. So again, if you feel constricted, you feel tight, and your heart, the mind, which again they call it the mind, you can't breathe. What's gonna happen? Okay, at the end, trust me. Before I leave this, I'm gonna go to at least two or three tips of how you can at least get started on your healing route and therapies if you're dealing with depression. I don't want to leave on a bad note. 855 L. Eberus, as to drying up the mind, it is that the blood coagulates in the heart. You know what coagulates mean? As to rotation falls on his heart, this means that heart rotation falls on his heart, that many become faint, and that his mind is consumed through DND. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Let me see if I can look that up right quick. DND. It is his heart's overfilling with blood, which does it. That arises through drinking of water and eating hot fish. Hmm. Yeah, that's one I don't really understand right there. Again, also keep in mind too that a lot of things that they did back in the day, um, we know a lot about, and at the same time, simultaneously, we know very little because we, you know, we're not really privy to everything. We have a lot of historians and wonderful scholars out there teaching on the practices and the history of Kemet, Kush, Nubia, all the way through the Nile River, Bahapi Eteru. But at the same time, you had all those books and all those libraries that got burned down. Fish was intuition, and you got to think about the geological location and time of this. Oh, yes, thank you, rock and roll. Thank you. Very, very true. You're right. Very true. Um, but yeah, a lot of books in those libraries are gone. Yeah, I'm willing to believe that there's probably still a lot of mysteries and their practices are still out there, but we just live in different times, and the amount of access we have to their secrets and mysteries is limited. But I always say one thing though, it was a reverence. The heat may be an internal activation. Okay, thank you. Internal activation. I appreciate that, rock and roll. Thank you. Um, yeah, I always say, no matter what, when I think about unlimited access to our ancestors' spirituality, if there's at least one way to gain full access to um, those realities of antiquity, I would say it's the plants. I think the plants will show you anything and everything. Excuse me, whether it's things similar to ayahuasca, DMT, peyote, psilocybin. There's ancient plants out there that are talked about that most people don't even know about. But if you ask the plants to show you the universe, they will show you. Just be careful what you ask for, because they'll take you down quite a path. Um, so I'm just gonna read a little bit more, and like I said, I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for joining. Like I said, this is just a rough draft. I'll have things together a little more on the next run that we do. And like I said, I want to do this at least once a week. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but anything I do, I want to be consistent. And more importantly than me or my ego being a part of it, it's all about the ancestors giving me permission. The ancestors they've been telling me like, you need to do this. You tripping? What are you doing? You can't be you know leaving all this information and wisdom that is given to me by them just under this rock or under this a lamp that's lit. Like, I want to make sure that I'm sharing the light with all humility that they deliver to me and through me. So thank you so much for being a part of this understanding at the University of Anansi. Ashe, Ashe. So I'll read a little bit more. Ebers 198. I'm gonna read what you said, rock and roll. I wholeheartedly agree they give and speak in a different vibration. Goddamn right they do. Mushrooms taught you that. I know they did. I believe you. I believe you. Believe that. Ebers 198. He hath turned deathly pale. His mind goes away. It is a blood nest that hath not attached itself. Um, One is due to Weju. Weju is vessels. As to the mind kneeling in the interior of his belly, this means that his mind is small in the interior of his belly, the purulency falling on his heart, the vessels falling on his heart. It's just basically this crash and burn, dismantling going on of the vessel, of the spirit, of the soul. To expel aha, poison from the heart, expel forgetfulness, fleeing and injury of the mind. Um, there's some more of this. Because I want to do a part two. I'm gonna save the rest of this because there's quite a bit more. Uh, but I'll read this part. I'll just read this part. In only two, in only two is the cause said to be of demonic or spiritual order. The reason why I wanted to read that was, again, I wanted to make it clear that this is not mental health. All that I express on my postings on IG, I'm not talking about mental health. I'm talking about spiritual health because that's how we did things. That's how we do things. I made this posting just yesterday regarding it's called the Breath Keeper's Prophecy, and in the Breath Keeper's Prophecy, it's talking about, for lack of words, Sankofa, a return. The disconnect from spirit, the disconnect from nature is real. And I'm not going to sit up here and act like I'm a prophet and say that all that's going on today is because of that. I don't know. I do know that there's a very enormous monumental disconnect from spirit and nature regarding a lot of humanity, right? We know that, right? Ashe. So we need to understand and overstand and make sure that we are clear on how we go about instituting our own practices from a spiritual perspective, from an African perspective, and understanding where the roots and origins of that comes from is enormously important. Which is why we will talk about Kemet. We will talk about Kush regarding origins of mental health. You want to get history lessons, you got to go somewhere else for that. I'm just talking about mental health. That's all I've always talked about. If you look at all my postings, everything is predicated and routed through mental and spiritual health. But yeah, Kush, Kemet, Nubia. We're gonna talk about Sangomas. Shout out to Gogo Akaya. And she's taught me a lot about that. We're gonna talk about the czars of Ethiopia. Um, talk about Zulu. Talk about Von Doon. Talk about Santeria. So this is so much. It's like it's a lot going on in my mind, but so much we're gonna talk about because that's our origins and even those spiritual practices are byproducts of a lot of things that were going on in Nubia and Kush and Kemet. So, lastly, I will end by saying this. Let's just go over, and please feel free to type in any particular practices that you do today to stay balanced, to maintain your level of spirit in your heart and in your mind. But I would say for starters, I always go to nature. My friends are in nature where two or three may gather. All I need is some trees. Nubian Eshe, I know you agree with me on that. Trees, Ra, the wind. There's a lot that you can gain by being in nature, and ultimately, I speak for myself because my journey and my healing and the measures of my healing came through nature. My first intuition, my first conversation that really started me on my journey back up in 2014 was being in nature, being on this trail. I still remember, and I'll go through that another time, but it was uh, in Georgia, Conyers, Lithonia, Georgia, on this trail. It was a wonderful, divine moment, and I will never forget that. But the reason why I say nature is one of the things at the top of my list. I don't want to put it in any order because anything that I do, any therapies that I know about and practice, they're interchangeable, and one is more important on this day, and another is more important on that day. But when it comes to nature, and this is something that I also discussed with brother Ross Ben at some point. Ross Ben in his 5G book, which is oh, got my books. I'm a little prepared, a little bit. um, this is Ross Ben's book. It's called 5G Wellness, Thriving in a 5G Environment with Crystals and Sacred Stones. Again, this is 5G Wellness, Thriving in a 5G Environment with Crystals and Sacred Stones. Nubian Eshe said, nature and deep breathing is all I need to get right. That's right. In this book, and I'll save this for another lesson too, it talks about the electromagnetic field. It talks about the harmful frequencies and vibrations of 5G. But something that really stood out just enormously to me was the detailed explanation of positive ions and what's going on with nature and with the vessels and with the crystal cellular molecular structure. I'm not gonna go too deep into that because I'll do a lesson on that. But what I will say, very simply, very simply, is that the body, the vessel, the heart, the spirit, and the mind, they have this amazing language and conversation that they speak with a leaf, with the leaves, with the wind, with the sun, especially us as highly melanated, with the sun, with the rain, with the waterfalls, with the butterflies, the insects, etc. I can go on and on and on. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. All you gotta do is just set your vessel in nature consistently, and it'll do the rest. It'll talk and it'll heal and do what it needs to do by itself in its own time, in due time. It's not overnight, but in its due time. So that's one tip. Nature. Number two, I would say, um, diet. Diet is so important. Stretching, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Stretching the body. Nubian Eshe, thank you for putting that down there. Stretching the body is a oxygen related practice. Is a good way to send oxygen through the blood, through the vessel. Um, Also, just a sidebar, just keeping in mind, I'll do a lesson on that too. Oxygen related practices is a good way to um, relieve the suppression and the constricting of vessels and of different things that cause a buildup regarding candida, regarding dampness, mucus buildup. So you want to do a lot of different various oxygen related practices, whether it's through diet, whether it's through exercise, whether it's through meditation, breathing exercises, as we talked about also. But diet, I'm not gonna go too much into detail on diet. We've been digesting a lot of different information over the years. I know a lot of you guys know what's good and what's right regarding diet at the moment, so I won't go too deep into that. But I will say, just at the least, vegetables and fruits, vegetables, fruits, and water. That should be most of your diet, most of our diet, anyways. That's our, in our culture, that's what we should more than likely utilize mostly. I won't speak for everybody. And I always talk about the bitters. So, dandelion greens, watercress. We talk about bitters all the time. Um, Ken Mess, I know it's your department. That's right. Diet all day. I know exactly what you're talking about. Um, so yeah, the bitters, dandelion greens, watercress. You got burdock root. We have sea moss. So many things. You have yellow dock. Um, yeah. Again, I'll get more into that later. So that would be a second tip. And last, I will throw out there community. That's something that I think that we lack a lot of in our culture. It'll be interesting to know what comes out of all that's going on. I do hope that a unification of sorts is something that happens. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Talking to you. community, building your village and your tribes, people of like minds, people that are willing to grow, that are willing to edify you, that are willing to be edified, people that have a sense of humility, and yeah, people that have wahits, yes, yes, wahit, people that have basically know what your journey is like, that can talk the same language. I did this thing called Find Your Twin one time, and it wasn't really to be taken literal, but it was like build community and build a village around people that look like you and that sound like you and that can basically be on the same level and frequency of what you're talking about regarding healing, regarding community, regarding conversation. So those would be the three tips. Those would be the three tips to keep your heart from sinking too low, from being constricted. And yeah, that's gonna wrap up the first lesson. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't know how this was gonna go, but I really enjoyed it. And again, the three books that I talked about was 5G Wellness with Ross Ben. Don't forget to follow Ross Ben. He's a mentor and he's a divine God of ours. Again, the other book was The House of Life per Ankh, right here. That's medical and magic science in ancient Egypt. And the last was a papyrus that we covered, and that was the Eber's papyrus. Okay, I'm gonna go. My dog is laying here. She's like, we need to get the hell on. And I'm going to be respectful to my daughter. So thank you for joining. And again, don't forget to share with your friends. And don't forget also, this live video is archived on YouTube under African Mental Health Practices. And it is under the University of Anansi. And peace and ashe and dua. Thank you so much, Nubi and Eshe, Ken Mess, rock and roll. I appreciate you guys. Peace. Okay. Are you sure you want it in now? Share story. And I'm gonna end this video. Looks like it did good. And I'll end this stream.